there is a darkness in humanity that has manifested itself in a lust for blood throughout the ages. The Old Testament and ancient myths catalog murder and revenge as part of the fabric of life in ancient times. Cain slew Abel. Romulus slew Remus. Unleashing the beast within is a possibility for all of us. The decision to kill from passion or premeditation has often defined our world, past, present, and future. Wars have terrorized entire populations for thousands of years. The American West was home to ruthless killers who were idolized in fiction and folklore. Evil evolved to a hideous new form with the genocidal dictators of the 20th century, such as Hitler, Stalin, and Mao Zedong, who ordered the death of tens of millions. But in the middle of the 20th century, a new and chilling phenomenon emerged in post-war Western society: the serial killer. As if fashioned from our nightmares, they terrify and fascinate us. Lurking behind masks of bland normality, they often evade capture for years, decades, or eternity. They are America's serial killers.
We killed her. We dumped her body off, and that was it. Nothing to it.
Every year in this country, we have about 20 serial killers, 10 of whom are apprehended, 10 of whom are on the loose. And they are, in total, responsible for some 200 deaths. So 200 victims of serial killers on a yearly basis. And what makes this particularly important for us is that the average serial killer is responsible for 10 deaths. That's a huge body count.
America's Serial Killers, Portraits in Evil, will strip the covers from a world of profiling and forensic science as we expose America's most brutal serial killers.
You know, the 1960s and 70s represented the dawn of a new era of serial murder in this country. And we saw the Boston Strangler in 62 through 64. The Zodiac was operating from 1969 on. Charles Manson in the late 1960s. And people were not used to thinking about these kinds of crimes because they hardly ever occurred. And then all of a sudden, we saw this tremendous increase in serial killings around the country. And it continued for several decades, so that many people were terrified wherever they lived, because even if there was no serial killer on the loose, they suspected that there was.
In 1963, the decade of the 60s, the decade of the new frontier, the decade of hope and promise, was shattered irreparably with the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. America was about to become a killing field. The 1960s were about to become the decade of death. As an unpopular war raged in Vietnam, television and newspapers reported daily body counts in the hundreds from both sides as headline news. when black civil rights activists confronted the old racist forces of the South, they were met with murder. In 1964, 3 civil rights activists, Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman, were murdered. By 1965, America exploded in rage, and for 2 years, violent clashes arose on American streets as inner cities became scenes of brutality and horror. From Watts to Detroit, hundreds died. All of it shown nightly on the news. On July 14, 1966, Richard Speck introduced television audiences to a new deadly phenomena, the murder spree, when he brutally and systematically killed 8 student nurses from South Chicago Community Hospital. By 1968, death was everywhere in the news, and nowhere more poignantly than when Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy became the next victims of assassination. The decade of death ended in tragedy in 1970, when the flower power and peace visions of the hippies turned deadly, and 4 students were killed by National Guardsmen at Kent State University. But the American penchant for murder found a whole new facet in the late 60s, thanks largely to an ex-convict and sometime musician from California. No one personified the dark side of the 60s clash of values more than the sex and drug-crazed demon hippie, Charles Manson. He added a new element to the overall violence of the period and opened the floodgates to a new wave of serial killing. Manson's perversion of life included an apocalyptic race war he named Helter Skelter, after the Beatles' hit song by the same name. The race war never materialized. Instead, the demented Manson and his equally demented family launched America onto the path of a serial killing spree that would last for decades.
Well, Manson certainly got people interested in crime and homicide. They got interested because of the semi-celebrities that were killed. I'd say semi because they weren't that well known yet. I think they were on their way to becoming well known. And the way the media treated some of the crime scenes that the sheriff's department allowed them to. The media basically walked all over the law enforcement community during part of that case, and they got a lot of information they shouldn't have had. And a lot of that information came out in the press and in television. Consequently, it just generated more interest on the part of the public. And it's almost as if that was the start of an era of serial killers as well as mass killing done all at one time.
Manson was born in 1934 to a 16-year-old unwed mother, Kathleen Maddox. Named Charles Miles Maddox, he took the name of Manson from a man his mother later married. From the start, Manson's life was a litany of brutality. At age 5, his mother, an alcoholic, sold him to a woman for a pitcher of beer. As a young boy, Manson turned to crime and was in and out of juvenile centers, even escaping from Boys Town in Nebraska. By 1967, when he began to form his infamous family, he had spent half of his 32 years in jails and prisons. 1967 was the summer of love. and Manson set himself up as a self-styled guru in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury, America's center of the counterculture. He attracted followers, mostly women. Together, his family traveled the western U.S. in a hippie-styled VW van, ending up in Los Angeles. Manson controlled his family, loving the sense of power over other human beings. On August 8, 1969, that sense of power turned deadly with the brutal assault at actress Sharon Tate's home. Manson sent members of his family to kill everyone at the house. The victims, Tate, 8.5 months pregnant, her friend Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, and her lover, were butchered, slashed and stabbed as many as 51 times. When the Manson family members left, they wrote the word "pig" on the front door in Sharon Tate's blood. 2 nights later, the family struck again. This time, led by Manson, they entered the home of Leno LaBianca and his wife, Rosemary. While Manson watched, the family members used knives to hack their helpless victims to death. The word "war" was carved into Leno LaBianca's stomach, while the couple's blood was used to write the words "rise," "death to pigs," and "helter skelter" on the walls of their home. When the Manson family was finally brought to justice, their horrific acts defied understanding. Yet, at the same time, they fascinated the public. And the cause of the killings was hotly debated. Some felt it was a political statement. Others do not agree.
There are also times when I think there's a political element to this. When someone is angry at a particular group, it could be people who are gay, people who are of color, people who are Jewish. And so there's this preoccupation with kind of snuffing out not just these individuals, but this group of people that these individuals happen to represent. And they are so obsessed by this particular group that there's no sense of guilt or remorse. They feel as if they're accomplishing an important mission.
I'm not sure the degree to which I buy into how much Charles Manson really believed in helter-skelter and the creation of a race war. For example, if you're going to create a race war by killing white people, don't you write things on the walls like, "Die white motherfuckers" or something like that? And they did not do that. These were people who death became part of their day-to-day vibe. Charles Manson liked creating an atmosphere of fear and of that kind of consciousness that fear brings, and certainly the killing of people and killing of the people that they disagreed with, the pigs, so to speak, became common talk around their family and around their group until it became actualized.
At age 73, Charles Manson remains in prison, not even bothering to show up to his parole hearings. This demonic figure is still what he always was: a little man who needed murder to feel big. With the changing American consciousness, California in the late 60s and 70s was indeed the center of hippiedom, the center of everything new and exciting.